All right, let's get going. This presentation is titled The Forgotten Philadelphian. Could have said Philadelphian painter. Right now, I don't know if you've seen it, if you live in Colorado, but there's a wonderful exhibit at the Denver Art Museum titled Whistler to Cassatt. It is a wonderful survey of the American artists who trained in Paris in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Now it ends March 13th, so you have about a month and a half left if you want to see it. However, it's traveling to the Virginia Museum of Fine Art located in Richmond, Virginia, and it opens there April 16th. Now, since my mother lives only an hour away from Richmond, I might have another chance to see it, but I've seen it 3 times so far, and I'd like to see it again before it leaves. Anyway, I highly recommend it. And after this presentation, I hope that it inspires all of you who haven't seen it to go and see it if possible. One of the highlights of the exhibit are the many paintings by the Philadelphian expatriate Mary Cassatt. She's actually born in Pittsburgh, but she grew up in Philadelphia and spent much of her early adult life there. She is rightly beloved for her impressionistic depictions of mothers with their young children. This painting that you see here is in the exhibit, as well as I think the next 3 or 4 images by her are in the exhibit. Here is another artwork, this done with pastels. When I look at this, it makes me want to pinch the cheeks of those little lassies, doesn't it? Do you feel that? She was an extraordinary artist. Mary Cassatt started her training at the the Pennsylvania Academy of Arts at the young age of 15. 15, that's really young, actually. And when she was around 22, she set off for Paris to complete her training. Now, after a few trips home, she decided to set up permanent residence in Paris. Now, that decision would prove fateful to her enduring reputation as a great artist. Again, this image is in the current exhibit at the Denver Art Museum. A wonderful scene in Paris. You can see the Paris cityscape behind the young lady's head. Makes me want to travel there. Artists loved white, and you're going to see several paintings of women in white dresses. And this was a way that an artist could kind of show off their prowess, because white is not the easiest medium to create shading with. You have to use obviously blues and grays and pinks, as in this work, but it has an extraordinary effect when you view it once it's done well by painters of the ability of Mary Cassatt. And as you can see, her excellent training is obvious in her portraits. Her reputation is well deserved. Take a moment to just admire her extraordinary ability. Take a look at that hair as well, just fantastic. Now, the big change in Cassatt's life and career came in 1874 when she met Edgar Degas. The two formed a close friendship, and Cassatt often posed for him. When she was invited by Degas to exhibit with the Impressionists in 1879, she eagerly jumped at the chance, and of course, the rest is history for her. By allying herself with the Impressionists, she was able to enjoy the fame that they received when their star finally rose among collectors. But early on, Cassatt had to endure rejection and ridicule initially that all the Impressionists received in the 1860s and 1870s. But something within her said, "This is my community and this is my style." As revered as Cassatt is in artistic circles, she was not the most awarded American woman painter of her day. That honor goes to another Philadelphian whose works are also represented in the Denver Art Museum exhibit. Of this artist, William Merritt Chase, a very famous artist and teacher, said, and he's also in the art exhibit at the Denver Art Museum, he's a fantastic artist, but he said when presenting her, this artist I'm about to tell you about, with Carnegie's Institute's gold medal, quote, "She is not only the greatest living woman painter, but the best that has ever lived. She has done away entirely with sex, that is gender, in art," unquote. And in 1933, Eleanor Roosevelt honored her as the, quote, "the American woman who had made the greatest contribution to the culture of the world, the greatest contribution," unquote. So who am I talking about? Celia Beau, of course. You are forgiven if you just thought to yourself, Celia who? I'll give you a little background on Cecilia. Cecilia and her older sister Etta were born to a French silk merchant, hence the French last name, Beau, and their American mother was from a successful business family from New York City. Now, unfortunately, their mother died shortly after Cecilia was born. And their father, their French father, was so grieved that he returned to live in France, and the two girls were left in the care of their maternal grandmother. Like Mary Cassatt, Cecilia trained at the Pennsylvania Academy of Art, where she was highly praised for her work. In fact, she started receiving commissions soon after graduating. Now, according to one source during my research for this presentation, Cecilia had the opportunity to marry this man, Henry Sturgis Drinker. Now, despite the burden of carrying that name, he was actually from a respectable Quaker family. He was a lawyer and an engineer who had a great career working for the Lehigh Valley Railroad. She could have had a comfortable life painting and raising a family, but she said no to his proposal. And so this man, Drinker, ended up marrying Cecilia's sister Etta. Like Mary Cassatt, Cecilia felt marriage would not support her career as an artist, but hinder it. So what does that tell you about these women's ambitions in life? It was probably this work depicting her sister Etta and young nephew Henry that gave Cecilia a calling card to the who's who of Northeast society. At the Pennsylvania Academy of Arts 1885 annual exhibition, this painting received the Mary Smith Prize for the best work by a local woman. But it was also accepted into the 1887 Paris Salon, a coup Beau deemed a turning point in her career. Why was this painting so well received? Well, look at the expression on young Henry's face. Take a moment and look at that expression. How did she capture that in a painting? It is so real, so authentic. But very few artists have the ability to capture such an expression, particularly on a child. Cecilia Beau, like Cassatt, traveled to Paris to complete her training. This was around 1887 that she went, so she is about 32 years old and already established as a sought-after artist in America. But she's ambitious. She wants to improve, and she wants to study with the very best in the Western world. So in Paris, she studied at the famous Académie Julian. She studied under the classical painter William Adolphe Bouguereau that you see here. He was an extremely famous painter and instructor at the time. Now, Mary Cassatt was already in Paris and had thrown in her artistic lot with Degas and the Impressionists, but Cecilia is studying under very traditional painters. I think artistic styles reflect some part of the personality of the artist. Usually they do. But both Mary and Cecilia are very ambitious women, so ambitious that they eliminated from their life anything that would hinder their development and their career, namely marriage. Both had plenty of suitors and both always said no. They believed that raising a family, that responsibility, would take too much away from their art career. And so they didn't start families. During their lives, they had very successful art careers, but as we know, their legacies were quite different. Maybe in Cecilia's case, that will change. This is one of Cecilia's most interesting early works that she created while in France. When the Paris Art School closed in the summer, she would spend the summer in, I'll try to pronounce this correctly, Concarneau, which is in Brittany in northern France. There had been a prominent art colony nearby led by Paul Gauguin, so there was a great recent artistic tradition there. This painting that you're looking at had disappeared for a long time until it was rediscovered in 2007, and it's now on display at the Georgia Museum of Art, which is part of the University of Georgia. The preparatory studies of this work were her first practice in plein air painting, which we know the Impressionists were all about. And here she has wonderfully captured the light off the faces of these women. But she's done something else. She's also captured their complex expressions. Some secret has been conveyed between these women. We know it, not merely because of the title of the work. Cecilia Beaux has captured it, or perhaps better, imaginatively expressed it. I'm showing you this portrait because the sitter, Sarah Doyle, helped found the Rhode Island College of Design, and she's perhaps most famous for establishing women's education at Brown University. Cecilia Beaux surrounded herself with such progressive and activist women. She herself was a progressive and an activist for women's issues. She also happens to be, not this woman, but Cecilia Beaux, the first permanent woman instructor at Pennsylvania's Academy of Art. She's a trailblazer. Here's a quote from Cecilia on the wall at the Denver Art Museum, and it reads, "I predict an hour when the term women in art will be as strange sounding a topic as the title men in art would be now." She felt by developing her artistic talent to its full potential, she would see her own works next to the paintings of her male contemporaries. Well, at least at the exhibit at the Denver Art Museum, her prediction has become a reality. Now let's take a look at the images below. From the drawing on the left, we know she mastered the human figure. The artist portrait on the right is that of her friend Alexander Harrison, who is best known for his marine paintings, and he also has artworks in the Denver Art exhibit as well. Cecilia spent the summer of 1888 in Concarneau, France, working in a studio near Harrison's, and she wrote of him, "Harrison, now at the apex of his strength, had already met the daimon." You've heard me talk about the daimon in previous presentations, that creative, vital, godlike energy within us. Tall, lanky, and superbly handsome, he easily won all he appeared to care for and much that he didn't want. But he had a religion. It was his art. He had an industry. It was his painting. And he had an untiring faith toward these, unquote. I share that quote with you because Beaux could easily be describing herself. She was a rather tall woman, lean and good looking, but art was her religion too. And she began her day every single day painting for 4 or more hours, and that was her industry. And when she immortalized Harrison in this portrait, she really was painting her own character. And she thus immortalized her own values and perspective about art. Now, unlike Mary Cassatt, who had set up permanent residence in Paris, Cecilia returns home and would maintain permanent residence in the American Northeast the remainder of her life. Composition in white, as I said earlier, was always compulsory for an artist to show off their ability. The woman on the left is the wife of Charles Darwin. So Cecilia is now painting for the highest level clientele. Give you a second to look at these works before moving on. Here's another extraordinary composition in white. Here we have two sisters, the children of one of the many wealthy patrons who commissioned portraits from Beau. The composition is interesting because it doesn't focus on the posers' identities, but their movements, which complement one another. It's as if Beau might be making a statement, something like something about the transition from girlhood to adolescence, perhaps. It is an amazing work. Now, looking at the woman on the right, we know that Cecilia was perfectly willing to flatter her subject, if that is what a fat commission check called for. But when she painted family, like her cousin here on the left with a black cat, Beau could reveal the real depth and complexity of her sitter. Her cousin's name is Sarah. I believe that the last name is pronounced Leavitt, Leavitt, or it could be Levitt. And though attractive, Beau has not painted her as a mere object of beauty. In this work, her cousin has intelligence and perhaps a dark wit when viewed with the cat on her shoulder. Now, there is almost an exact version of this painting completed around 1894 and 1895 that is now in the collection of the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, another one of the world's greatest museums. The French loved the inclusion of the cat and the dark, mysterious energy it evoked. I think the French people liked it so much because that cat reminded them of this painting, which created such a stir when first exhibited. See the cat on the far right? Now, the poser for this painting was obviously a prostitute, and the cat was included to evoke the darker, evocative, and forbidden nature of the subject. Certainly, Cecilia Beau knew of the Manet painting. So why would she include this cat with her high society and traditional cousin? Just take a moment and think to yourself, why do you think Cecilia included that cat? Let's move on. Take a look at the title of this portrait. Not a bad commission to receive, you think? So Cecilia Beau's career and reputation are now well established. She would end up dividing her time between 3 residences, and she could afford to support members of her family as well. Now, it's tempting to compare Cecilia Beau to her fellow Pennsylvanian, Mary Cassatt, and she did paint many images of mothers with their children. But art critics of her day and now compare her more to John Singer Sargent. In fact, she was considered by many during her day to be his equal, and thus a friendly rival. Now, because Sargent resided mainly in European cities like London and Paris, that left the North American elite for Beau, but Sargent did receive commissions from wealthy Americans as well. So on occasion, they competed directly for commissions. Take a good look at how each artist handles facial expressions. Facial expressions are, of course, key to conveying the complexity of a personality and the sign of a master portrait artist. Now, Sargent's work on the left wants to convey the self-assured confidence, I think, of the adult Mrs. Sears. Beau, I believe, wants to convey maybe a slight awkwardness of a child trying to overcome her apprehensions toward the strange world of adults. Before I move on, what do you think is being conveyed in their expressions? Let's compare two more works, one by Sargent and one by Bow. One might call these two paintings proof that there was perhaps a friendly competition between Sargent and Bow. The couple on the left that Sargent painted are the son and daughter-in-law of the couple on the right that Bow painted. In both paintings, the women take center stage. The young Mrs. Stokes on the left conveys a very rare thing for a portrait. She has an open-mouthed smile, very unusual at the time. And actually, this caused a little bit of controversy for Sargent. The critics, I think, thought it wasn't properly dignified to show someone smiling with their mouth open. The older Mrs. Stokes on the right conveys, I think, a woman relaxed in her role as wife to one of the wealthiest men in society, yet she also confidently knows of her significance and her place in this family. She has a warm and friendly expression. She might invite one of us over for a cup of tea. Because Cecilia felt a full-time art career was incompatible with marriage, she remained extremely close to her sister, Etta, and her nieces and nephews. She had 6 total nieces and nephews. And so they were sort of her surrogate children. Her favorite subject was her niece, Ernesta, which everyone thought was one of the prettiest girls they'd ever seen. And judging by these paintings, that was obviously true. Again, notice she likes to paint women in white dresses. Now on to a very strange picture of Ernesta. It's in the collection at Hillsdale College. When this painting first appeared, it was a sensation, but then it disappeared. Now you can see from the image on the right that this painting has been cut up with only 2 sections surviving: the portrait of Ernesta and, strangely and oddly, Ernesta's shoes. The image on the right that you see was the original version that debuted in Manhattan at the National Academy of Design's spring exhibit in 1913. It was the featured image in the exhibit catalog. It was the featured painting in the major newspaper articles about the exhibit, including the New York Times. So it was the star of the show. One newspaper review stated of this work, quote, "Its fluent, expressive technique is worthy of Sargent himself," unquote. And one critic, this is important, pointed out the exquisite beauty and perfection of the shoes. Now, something very interesting was happening across town at the same time as the National Academy exhibit. The famous or infamous, depending on your view, Armory Show that introduced American audience for the first time to the modernist art movement taking place in Europe. Though controversial, a seismic fissure appeared in the American art world, with many turning decidedly toward modernism. It was also the first death knell of the Golden Age. Now, Cecilia at this time is faced with a choice. Does she stick with her classical academic style, which had been her formula for success? Or does she adjust her style based on what the art capital of the world, Paris at the time, dictates? Well, Cecilia believed the modernist movement was a passing fad. Let's go back to that image. So she stuck with her classical style, and it continued to pay off because most wealthy patrons in America preferred traditional styles of art. And the American art world loved this work of art. So let's examine it again. The New York Tribune mentioned it in its review of the National Academy exhibit that this image must have taken place in a warm climate because the servant in the background, do you see that man in the background? Referred to as a, quote, servant, is clad in the white clothes typical of the tropics. Well, what that article did is it kind of whitewashed any potential scandalous interpretation of this painting. And whitewash was a deliberate pun, by the way. Think about that, though. When this was first exhibited, how would you have interpreted it? A young woman, Ernesta, unmarried at the time, in a hotel room, maybe, with a gentleman in the background. Well, within a few years of the National Academy exhibit, Cecilia revised this painting in one small way. The mysterious man in the background disappeared. Why might she have done that? After all the acclaim the work had received when it was first exhibited? Here's a conjecture of mine. Ernesta married her first husband, the U.S. Ambassador William C. Bullitt Jr., in March of 1916. This was exhibited in March of 1913. So it's right in the time frame that the picture was revised. So I think either Ernesta or her husband preferred a less ambiguous and more conservative setting in the painting. What do you think? Sure, the man in white might be a servant in her home or hotel room, but Ernesta is young and single, so why invite questions? Well, shortly after she painted the man out, she revised the background again, making it an outdoor scene and retitling it On the Terrace. The painting then disappeared from public eyes. Now, at some point late in Cecilia's life, the painting was cut into the pieces that you see, with only the two fragments highlighted in color surviving. What happened? Why would a painting that was such a sensation disappear and then get diminished, mutilated? And why was the section containing the shoes preserved? Well, here's my guess. Remember that favorable review that singled out the exquisite and beautiful rendering of the shoes of the sitter? That's my only guess, honestly. I invite you to enter this mystery yourself and conjecture why the painting was changed and then why it was cut up and disappeared. I told you the strange story of this painting because its fate mirrors in many ways the fate of Beau's legacy. This self-portrait of Cecilia resides in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, Italy. Again, one of the most famous art museums in the world. So why is Cecilia Beaux no longer mentioned with her famous contemporaries, Sargent and Cassatt? Why did we forget about her? Well, I'm going to open up that mystery for discussion now.